The auctioneer's gavel struck with a crack that split the humid afternoon air. But it was the woman's anguished cry that silenced the crowd gathered outside the courthouse in Redemption Springs, Texas, in the summer of 1875. "Sell me, but spare my child," she sobbed, clutching a small bundle to her breast as rough hands sought to separate them. Flynn Harrington had not intended to stop in Redemption Springs that day. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes, the color of a storm-washed sky, had been on his way to Fort Worth with plans that didn't include detours. Yet something about the desperation in the woman's voice had drawn him to the edge of the crowd, his spurs jingling softly as he dismounted from his chestnut stallion. "What's happening here?" Flynn asked a wizened old man standing nearby. The old-timer spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Dead auction. That their woman's husband died owing plenty to the wrong people. Banks taking everything, including their labor contracts. Woman and child included, seems like." Flynn's jaw tightened as he pushed through the crowd. The woman stood on a small wooden platform, her dress faded but clean, her dark blonde hair falling loose from what had once been a neat bun. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, Flynn guessed. Her face, though streaked with tears, showed a quiet dignity that struck him more powerfully than her sobs. $500 for the woman alone, called a heavy-set man in an expensive suit. "Child goes to the orphanage." "No, please," the woman begged, holding the child tighter. "We're all each other has." Flynn found himself moving forward before he'd fully formed the thought. "How much for both?" The auctioneer, a thin man with oily hair and spectacles perched on a hooked nose, looked down at Flynn with surprise. "Well now, seems we have a gentleman with an interest. The woman's labor contract is up for $500. Child wasn't part of the arrangement but could be included for an additional sum." "I'm asking how much for both of them together," Flynn repeated, his voice carrying the hard edge of a man used to being answered the first time. The woman's eyes, a startling shade of hazel, met his. Not with hope, she was too beaten down for that, but with a wariness that suggested she'd learned to expect the worst from life and the men in it. $800 would clear the debt entirely, the auctioneer said after consulting with a bank representative. Flynn reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. The crowd murmured as he counted out gold coins onto the auctioneer's table. $800 in gold, he said firmly, and the contract is satisfied completely. The bank representative inspected the coins, then nodded reluctantly. "Deal's done." "No," shouted the heavy-set man who had bid earlier. You were promised nothing," the bank representative cut in. "Highest bidder wins. That's the law." Flynn ignored the commotion and approached the platform, extending his hand to the woman. "Madam, you and your child are free to go." She stared at his hand as if it might be a snake. "What do you want from us?" she whispered, clutching her child closer. "Nothing," Flynn replied. "I just couldn't stand by and watch." "Nobody pays $800 in gold for nothing," she said, still not taking his hand. "I reckon that's true enough," Flynn conceded. "But all I want right now is to get you and your little one away from here before that fellow in the fancy suit tries to make more trouble. We can figure out the rest later." Hope Reeves had learned the hard way that men's kindness usually came with strings attached. Her late husband Josiah had seemed kind too, until the drinking and the gambling had revealed his true nature. But with her infant daughter Rebecca in her arms and nowhere else to turn, she reluctantly took the cowboy's calloused hand. "I'm Flynn Harrington," he said as he helped her down from the platform. "Hope Reeves," she replied softly, "and this is Rebecca." Flynn nodded respectfully. "Let's get your things and find somewhere quiet to talk." Hope's Things amounted to one small carpetbag that contained everything she and Rebecca had left in the world. Flynn carried it for her as they walked away from the courthouse, aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Redemption Springs was a small town, and news traveled fast. They stopped at a modest cafe on the main street. Flynn ordered coffee for himself and Hope, and warm milk for the baby. Once they were seated in a quiet corner, Hope finally gathered the courage to ask the question burning in her mind. "Mr. Harrington, why did you do that back there?" Flynn took a slow sip of his coffee, as if choosing his words carefully. "My ma raised me to believe that some things aren't right, no matter what the law says. Separating a mother and child is one of those things." Hope studied him, trying to see beyond the sunburned face and the quiet confidence to the man beneath. Flynn Harrington was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. His clothes were dusty from the trail but of good quality, and the way he had handled that gold suggested he wasn't a man who struggled for money. "What happens now?" she asked, adjusting Rebecca in her arms. The baby had fallen asleep, one tiny fist clutching at Hope's dress. "That depends on you, Mrs. Reeves. The debt's been paid. You're free to go wherever you please." Hope laughed bitterly. "Free to go where? With what? I have no home, no money, and no family." Flynn nodded, understanding the impossibility of her situation. "I own a cattle ranch about 2 days' ride from here. It's called Silvergrass. I could use help around the place cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. It's honest work, and you'd have a roof over your head, a place for your daughter to grow up safe." Hope's eyes narrowed. "And what else would you expect from me, Mr. Harrington?" Flynn's face flushed slightly, but he met her gaze directly. "Nothing you're not willing to give, Mrs. Reeves. You'd have your own quarters in the house. I'm offering employment, not anything else." Hope wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. "I can cook," she said finally, "and so, I kept house for my husband and his father before him." "Then we have an arrangement," Flynn said, extending his hand across the table. "1 month's trial. If you're not satisfied, I'll give you enough money to get to any town you choose and start over." Hope shifted Rebecca to one arm so she could shake his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "I accept your offer, Mr. Harrington." Flynn smiled, and Hope noted that it transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Good. We'll stay in town tonight and set out at first light tomorrow." The journey to Silvergrass Ranch took 2 full days, just as Flynn had predicted. He had purchased a wagon and team in Redemption Springs, making a comfortable space in the back where Hope could ride with Rebecca. Flynn drove the wagon himself, leading his stallion behind them. During those 2 days, Hope learned more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her and her daughter. Flynn Harrington had fought in the war, though he spoke little of it. Afterward, he had worked cattle drives until he'd saved enough to buy his own land. Silvergrass Ranch was modest by Texas standards, 3,000 acres with a growing herd of longhorns, but it was all his. "No wife waiting for you at home?" Hope asked on the second day, then immediately regretted the personal question. Flynn didn't seem to mind. "No, madam. Never found the time for courting, I suppose." "Surely the ladies of Texas haven't overlooked a ranch owner with $800 in gold to spare," Hope said with the first hint of teasing that had entered her voice since they'd met. Flynn chuckled. "Well, there was someone once. Catherine was her name. She was a schoolteacher in Austin. We wrote letters for nearly 2 years while I was saving for the ranch. But when I finally had enough to start building a life, she'd already accepted another man's proposal. A banker, I believe." "I'm sorry," Hope said softly. Flynn shrugged. "It was for the best. Ranch life isn't easy, especially for a woman used to city comforts. Better to know that before than after." Hope thought of her own difficult marriage. Sometimes it's the people, not the circumstances, that make life hard or easy. Flynn glanced at her with newfound respect. "That's a wise observation, Mrs. Reeves. Please call me Hope," she said. "If we're to live under the same roof, Mrs. Reeves seems overly formal." "Hope, then," Flynn agreed with a nod. "And I'm Flynn to everyone except the tax collector." They arrived at Silvergrass Ranch just as the sun was setting on the second day. Hope's first impression was of space, endless rolling hills covered with silver-tipped grass that gave the ranch its name. The house itself was larger than she had expected, a two-story structure built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. "It's beautiful," Hope breathed as Flynn helped her down from the wagon. "It's home," Flynn said simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. Two men came out to greet them: Hank, an older cowhand with a limp who served as Flynn's foreman, and Miguel, a young Mexican vaquero who helped with the cattle and horses. Both men tipped their hats respectfully to Hope and made appropriate fuss over baby Rebecca, who had weathered the journey remarkably well. The interior of the house was plain but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and clean lines. Flynn showed Hope to a bedroom on the first floor with an adjoining smaller room. "I thought the little one might sleep here," he said, indicating the smaller room. "Once she's older, of course. For now, I imagine you'll want her close." Hope was touched by his thoughtfulness. "This is perfect." "Thank you." Flynn looked suddenly awkward, as if he'd just remembered something. "I should tell you I don't usually have women around. The house is functional, nothing fancy." Hope smiled. "Mr. Har Flynn, after what I've been through, a clean bed and safe walls are fancy enough for me." Flynn nodded, relieved. "Well then, I'll let you get settled. Kitchen's through there if you're hungry. Make yourself at home." That first night, Hope lay awake long after she had fed and settled Rebecca. The events of the past few days seemed almost dreamlike in their swift progression from utter despair to what? Not security, exactly. She still didn't fully trust Flynn's motives, no matter how honorable he seemed. But for the first time since Josiah's death, she felt a fragile hope for the future, a hope that extended beyond mere survival. In the days that followed, Hope fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She cooked hearty meals for Flynn and his two hands, kept the house tidy, and tended to Rebecca, who seemed to thrive in the clean country air. Flynn was often away from dawn till dusk, working with the cattle or mending fences or handling the 1,000 tasks that came with running a ranch. When they did see each other, usually at breakfast and supper, their conversations were polite but increasingly comfortable. Flynn never pressed Hope for details about her past, and she appreciated his restraint. In turn, she respected his privacy, understanding that he was a man accustomed to solitude. But life has a way of forcing intimacy, even between the most careful of souls. It happened on a stormy night about 3 weeks after Hope's arrival at Silvergrass. A late summer thunderstorm had rolled in from the west, bringing with it sheets of rain and violent wind. Hope had just put Rebecca down for the night when a particularly loud crack of thunder woke the baby with a terrified wail. Hope was trying to comfort her when Flynn appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Everything all right in here?" Hope nodded, bouncing Rebecca gently. "Just the storm frightening her. She'll settle soon enough." Another crash of thunder sent Rebecca into fresh howls. Flynn hesitated, then stepped into the room. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Surprised, Hope handed Rebecca to him. The baby continued to cry as Flynn cradled her awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. He began to hum softly, a melody Hope didn't recognize, and amazingly, Rebecca's cries subsided to hiccuping whimpers. "You have a way with her," Hope said, impressed. Flynn smiled down at the baby. My sister had 4 little ones. I used to help when I visited. Been a while, though. Hope watched as this strong, silent man gently rocked her daughter, his large hands supporting her with unexpected tenderness. Something shifted in her heart at the sight, a softening, a recognition of a goodness she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge before. "Where is your sister now?" Hope asked. A shadow crossed Flynn's face. "She died. Influenza took her and 2 of the children 3 winters ago." "I'm so sorry," Hope said, reaching out instinctively to touch his arm. Flynn nodded, his gaze still on Rebecca, who had fallen back asleep. "Life can be cruel, but it goes on." He carefully handed the sleeping baby back to Hope. "Like this little one here. She's got her whole life ahead of her." "Thanks to you," Hope said softly. Flynn met her eyes then, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended words. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "Storm might last all night." That night marked a turning point. The careful distance they had maintained began to erode, replaced by a cautious friendship. Flynn started making time to join Hope and Rebecca for a midday meal when his work allowed. Hope found herself looking forward to these moments, to sharing observations about her day or listening to Flynn's stories about the cattle or the land. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rebecca asleep in a basket beside Hope's chair, Flynn brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "Your month's trial is nearly up," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Have you given any thought to what you want to do?" Hope had in fact thought of little else for days. "Are you dissatisfied with my work?" she asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "No," Flynn said quickly. "Not at all. The house hasn't run this smoothly since, well, ever. And the men would revolt if they had to go back to my cooking." Hope smiled at that. "Then I'd like to stay if that's all right with you. Rebecca and we've found peace here." Flynn's expression softened. "I was hoping you'd say that. Silvergrass feels more like a home with you both here." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did Hope. In the fading light, she could see a flush creeping up his neck. "I should check on the horses," he said abruptly, standing up. "Flynn," Hope called as he reached the steps. He turned back. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then disappeared into the gathering dusk. As autumn painted the hills around Silvergrass in shades of gold and russet, Hope found herself falling into a contentment she had never known, not even in the early days of her marriage. Rebecca grew stronger and more curious each day, crawling now and beginning to pull herself up on furniture. Flynn took genuine delight in the baby's progress, often bringing her small treasures from his rides, a pretty stone or a softly whispered feather. Hope watched their bond develop with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Joy because Rebecca deserved a good man in her life, someone steady and kind. Trepidation because her own feelings for Flynn were becoming increasingly complicated. She told herself it was natural gratitude deepening into affection, respect growing into something warmer. But in the quiet moments when she was honest with herself, Hope knew it was more than that. She was falling in love with Flynn Harrington. The realization terrified her. Her marriage to Josiah had begun with love, or what she had thought was love, only to curdle into bitterness and fear. She had sworn never to make herself so vulnerable again. Yet here she was, her heart opening like a flower to the sun of Flynn's quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. Flynn, for his part, gave no indication that he saw Hope as anything other than his housekeeper and the mother of a child he had helped rescue. He was unfailingly respectful, careful never to intrude on her privacy or make her uncomfortable. If sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, well, that was likely just her imagination playing tricks. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. Hope had never experienced a Texas winter on the open range, and the fierce wind that howled around the house at night made her grateful for the solid walls and warm hearth of Silvergrass. Flynn spent long days ensuring the cattle had access to feed and water, often returning after dark with ice in his beard and exhaustion in every line of his body. Hope took to waiting up for him, a hot meal ready no matter the hour. He never asked it of her, but the grateful look in his eyes when he came in from the cold was reward enough. On Christmas Eve, Flynn surprised Hope by bringing in a small pine tree he had cut from a sheltered grove on the property. Together, they decorated it with paper stars Hope had cut out and strings of dried berries. Rebecca, now 9 months old, watched the proceedings with wide-eyed wonder, reaching for the lowest branches with chubby hands. "I have something for you," Flynn said that night after they had finished decorating the tree. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Hope unwrapped it carefully to find a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, opening it to find it empty, waiting for a memento. "I thought maybe you might want to put a lock of Rebecca's hair in it," Flynn suggested. "Something to keep her close to your heart." Hope looked up at him, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, I don't have anything for you. You've given me plenty," Flynn said quietly. "This house was just walls and a roof before you came. Now it's a home." Hope impulsively reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Merry Christmas, Flynn." His fingers tightened around hers. "Merry Christmas, Hope." That night, after putting Rebecca to bed, Hope stood at her window watching the snow fall in the moonlight. The locket hung around her neck, already containing a tiny curl of Rebecca's hair. She touched it gently, thinking of Flynn's words, home. Yes, Silvergrass had become home in a way no place had ever been before. But what would happen when Rebecca grew older? When she needed schooling, when she started asking questions about her father? And what of Hope's own heart, increasingly tangled in feelings for a man who had rescued her, but might never see her as more than a responsibility? These questions haunted Hope as winter deepened, even as the daily rhythms of ranch life continued. Flynn rarely went to town during the coldest months, but when the first thaw came in late February, he announced he needed supplies. "I'll be gone overnight," he told Hope over breakfast. "There are some business matters I need to attend to as well." Hope nodded, ignoring the small pang of disappointment at the thought of an evening without Flynn's steady presence. "We'll manage just fine." Flynn looked at her for a long moment, as if wanting to say something more, then simply nodded and went to prepare for his journey. The day stretched endlessly without him. Hope kept busy with her usual tasks, but the house felt emptier somehow, the silence more pronounced. Rebecca was fussy, as if she too sensed the absence of the man who had become such a constant in their lives. It was nearly midnight when Hope heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching the house. Relief flooded through her. Flynn wasn't due back until the following day. She hurried to the window and peered out into the moonlit yard, expecting to see Flynn's familiar figure dismounting from his chestnut stallion. Instead, she saw 3 riders, none of them Flynn. They reined in before the house, their faces shadowed beneath their hats. Something about their posture, the way they surveyed the property, sent a chill down Hope's spine. She quickly checked that Rebecca was still sleeping soundly, then moved to Flynn's study where she knew he kept a rifle. Her hands trembled as she loaded it the way Flynn had taught her, just in case. A heavy knock sounded at the front door. Hope stood frozen, the rifle clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Reeves," a voice called. "We know you're in there. Open up." Hope's blood ran cold. No one had called her Mrs. Reeves since she'd left Redemption Springs. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Name's Clayton Burke. I represent Mr. Alastair Morgan of Redemption Springs. We've come about a debt." Hope's mind raced. Alastair Morgan, the heavy-set man in the expensive suit who had tried to bid on her at the auction. "There is no debt," she called back. "Everything was settled months ago." A harsh laugh came from the other side of the door. "That's not how Mr. Morgan sees it. He paid good money to secure your contract before that cowboy interfered. He's come to claim what's his." "Mr. Harrington paid the debt in full," Hope insisted, her grip tightening on the rifle. "It was witnessed and recorded. Bank records can be adjusted," Burke replied. "Now open this door before we break it down." Hope backed away from the door, her mind racing. Hank and Miguel were in the bunkhouse, too far to hear what was happening. Flynn was miles away in town. She and Rebecca were alone. "I have a rifle," she warned, "and I know how to use it." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of boots on the porch steps, moving away from the door. Hope felt a momentary relief that was shattered by the crash of breaking glass from the kitchen at the back of the house. Heart pounding, Hope ran to Rebecca's room, snatched her still sleeping daughter from her cradle, and headed for the back stairs that led to the cellar. She had just reached the kitchen when a figure loomed in the broken window, one of Burke's men, climbing through. Hope raised the rifle and fired without hesitation. The shot went wide, splintering the window frame, but it was enough to make the man duck back with a curse. Hope used the moment to dash for the cellar door, fumbling with the latch as Rebecca woke and began to cry. "SHH, sweetheart, please," Hope begged, finally getting the door open and hurrying down the dark stairs. The cellar was cold and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Hope found a corner behind some barrels and crouched there, cradling Rebecca against her chest with one arm while keeping the rifle ready with the other. Above, she could hear the men moving through the house, calling for her. Rebecca's cries had subsided to whimpers, but Hope feared they would give away their hiding place at any moment. She pressed her face against her daughter's hair, whispering soothing nonsense, praying for a miracle. The cellar door creaked open. Footsteps on the stairs. "Mrs. Reeves," Burke's voice echoed in the darkness. "This is foolish. You can't hide forever." Hope held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows behind the barrels. Rebecca, sensing her mother's fear, remained miraculously quiet. Burke reached the bottom of the stairs and stood still, listening. "Mr. Morgan is a powerful man, Mrs. Reeves. He gets what he wants, and what he wants is you." Hope's finger tightened on the trigger of the rifle. She would not go back. She would not let Rebecca grow up under the thumb of a man like Alastair Morgan. The sound of a gunshot made Hope jump, but it hadn't come from her rifle. It had come from upstairs. Then another, and another. Burke cursed and rushed back up the stairs. Hope remained frozen in place, unable to make sense of what was happening. More gunshots, shouts, the sound of breaking furniture. Then silence. "Hope," Flynn's voice calling her name with an edge of panic. "Hope, where are you, Flynn?" Hope emerged from behind the barrels, Rebecca clutched to her chest, hardly daring to believe it was really him. His boots thundered down the cellar stairs, and then he was there, his face pale in the dim light filtering from above. "Are you hurt? Either of you?" Hope shook her head, tears of relief streaming down her face. "How did you?" "I ran into Alastair Morgan in town," Flynn explained grimly. "He was drunk, boasting about how he'd finally tracked down his woman and sent men to collect you. I rode back as fast as I could." Hope swayed, suddenly light-headed with relief and lingering fear. Flynn stepped forward, taking the rifle from her hands and setting it aside before wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's over now," he assured her as he guided her up the stairs. "Burke and his men won't bother you again." In the kitchen, Hope saw that Flynn hadn't come alone. The sheriff from the nearest town stood there along with Hank and Miguel. Burke and another man sat against the wall, their hands tied behind them. "Where's the third one?" Hope asked. "Ran off," Hank said with a grim smile. "Miguel's horse stepped on his foot first, though. He won't get far." The sheriff approached, hat in hand. "Mrs. Reeves, Mr. Harrington has explained the situation. These men will face charges of breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and fraud. Mr. Morgan, too, once we get back to town." Hope nodded numbly, still trying to process everything that had happened. Flynn's arm remained around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. After the sheriff had taken Burke and his companion away, promising to send someone for the third man, Hope finally allowed herself to truly feel the aftermath of the terror she had experienced. She began to shake uncontrollably and might have collapsed if Flynn hadn't guided her to a chair. "Rebecca," she managed, looking down at her daughter who, remarkably, had fallen back asleep against her chest. "Let me take her," Flynn said gently. "You're exhausted." Hope surrendered Rebecca to Flynn's careful hands, watching as he cradled her with the same tenderness he had shown during the thunderstorm months ago. Something about seeing him hold her daughter while she slept, safe and content despite the chaos around them, broke through the last of Hope's carefully constructed walls. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "Either of you." Flynn's eyes darkened. "I should never have left you alone, if anything had happened to you or Rebecca." "But it didn't," Hope interrupted. "You came back. You saved us." Flynn knelt beside her chair, Rebecca still cradled in one arm. With his free hand, he reached up to brush a tear from Hope's cheek. "I will always come back for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you." Hope's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Flynn, I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that day in Redemption Springs when you looked at me with those wary eyes and asked what I wanted from you. I didn't know the answer then. I do now." Hope's heart soared even as fear tried to claim her. "What do you want from me, Flynn Harrington?" "Everything," he whispered. "A life together. A family. I want to be a father to Rebecca and maybe someday to other children too. I want to grow old with you at Silvergrass, watching the seasons change year after year." Hope touched his face, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes, the firm set of his jaw. "I've been so afraid to trust this feeling," she admitted. "After Josiah, I swore I'd never give my heart to another man." "I'm not asking you to trust me because of words," Flynn said. "Judge me by my actions now and in all the days to come." Hope thought of everything this man had done, the gold he had paid to keep her and Rebecca together, the home he had offered with no expectations, the gentle way he cared for her daughter, the miles he had ridden through the night to save them both. "I love you too," she said, the words carrying the weight of a vow. "I think perhaps I always have, from that first day when you extended your hand to me and offered freedom instead of chains." Flynn smiled, the joy in his face making him look younger, unburdened. "Then will you marry me, Hope Reeves? Make Silvergrass truly your home, not as my housekeeper but as my wife." Hope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in answer. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and healing, the first of many to come. When they parted, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the quiet kitchen. "Is that a yes?" he murmured. Hope laughed softly. "Yes, Flynn Harrington, that's a yes." They were married in the spring when the hills around Silvergrass bloomed with wildflowers and new life. Rebecca, now walking on unsteady legs, scattered rose petals before Hope as she walked toward Flynn, who waited beneath an arch of twisted branches and early blossoms. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, drought seasons and harsh winters, illness and disputes with neighboring ranchers. But they also brought joy in abundance. The birth of twin boys 2 years after their wedding, the gradual expansion of Silvergrass Ranch into one of the most prosperous in the region, and the deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each passing season. Rebecca grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's hazel eyes and her adoptive father's steady nature. Flynn taught her to ride and shoot as well as any cowboy, while Hope made sure she learned the gentler arts as well. When she was old enough to understand, they told her the story of how they had become a family of a desperate auction, a cowboy's gold, and the love that had saved them all. On warm summer evenings, long after the children were grown with families of their own, Hope and Flynn would still sit together on the porch of Silvergrass, watching the sun set over land that had seen their sorrows and their joys. Sometimes, Hope would touch the silver locket that still hung around her neck, now containing not only a lock of Rebecca's baby hair, but also tiny snippets from each of their children and grandchildren. "You ever regret it?" she asked Flynn once, as they watched their grandchildren playing in the yard where once she had confronted intruders with a rifle in her trembling hands. "Regret what?" Flynn asked, his hair now silver but his eyes still the color of a storm-washed sky. "Stopping that day in Redemption Springs. Spending your gold to buy a woman and child you didn't know." Flynn took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "It was the best investment I ever made," he said simply. "Everything I value in this world came from that moment." Hope rested her head against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that some debts can never be repaid, and some don't need to be. What had begun with a desperate plea and an act of compassion had grown into something far richer than gold. A love that had sustained them through decades, a family forged not by blood but by choice, and a home built on the foundation of second chances. "Sell me, but spare my child," she had begged on that long-ago day. Instead, Flynn Harrington had saved them both and in doing so had saved himself as well.